What's up? So I got a tune that a buddy of mine sent over, Ro Anthony. Check the guy out. He's places. He's on the TikToks and whatnot. He's a dog. We got stuff we're working on. But anyways, so we're gonna go over a little bit of production stuff, talk a little bit about sound selection and why it matters when we actually get to the mixing stage of things, and how that can affect how a mix goes, right? On a basic level, right? And then we're going to go over a few of the really common just beginner mistakes or things that you can just miss on as someone who's a little bit newer to the mixing side of things, and how I went about fixing those issues. So first off, let's listen to a snippet of his mix.
Do you have a lost love? Yes. I'm hoping that he's not gone forever. Fuck, yeah.
There's a quick snippet of that thing. So the first thing I want to go over is, let's talk about the sound selection stuff. So if you, and that'll feed into the stuff I pulled up on the U-Lean and the Span while we were playing that clip. So on the sound selection side, listening to it, it's a sweet beat, by the way. I love the sounds in it, but you can hardly hear some of them, right? It sounds fairly muddy to that thing, and it's hard to pick out some of the individual stuff that he has going on. So what he's done in the sound selection side of things is he's picked pretty much all mid-range sounds, right? There's the only high end is a little bit of the drums, but it's not all that much off the style of drums that he picked. There's not a lot of high-end side to that stuff, and so literally everything's just sitting in the mids, right? So there's a couple different leads in that tune that's really kind of tough to pick out unless you're really listening to them. And the melody itself, the main melody loop, has a bunch of stuff going on to it, but it's hard to pick out specifics, right? It's not super clear on that side of things. And then there's the bass as well, okay, which is going to be the first kind of common mistake that we get into. But that thing has, as it's a Reese, it's got a bunch of other stuff going on, right, into the mids especially. So it's everything sort of in that narrow band of the mid, which is going to give you trouble when it comes to mixing and having certain elements stand out. So as far as the little bit of sound selection that I said we were going to go over, it's just making sure that the sounds you're picking aren't stacked up only in the same sort of frequencies. Make sure we got some high-end stuff, some low mid, some high mid. It's not necessarily a rule, but if you want different elements to be heard and have a really high-quality, clean mix, it's certainly going to make it easier to make happen if you got some sounds that stick out more in the high end, some more stuff in the mids, right, and then your low end as well. So let's talk about the issues with the low end. As we are listening to that, I'm sure you noticed, just on the listening part, that there were some spots where you really heard it and it sounds really good, but then it would just be gone. And it's not because the inputs, the sound isn't there. I want to bring up the point of the span, right? If you looked at that, there's tons of low end information going on, yet while the tune's playing, you don't hear it. And so that's the first point I wanted to make. So I'm going to solo this, but I'm just going to turn it all the way down, just so we can look at the actual waveform going on. Unless I can't do that. I cannot. Okay. Cool. Oh, I'll just do this. I'll turn off the audio. That's smart. Okay. Now we got it pulled up. You can see what's going on. Right, so I have this guy here with the side info. So, see what's happening. Everything in this low end, right, is also putting out a bunch of side information, right, bleeding into this stuff. So what's going on, see this correlometer, right? Basically we got crazy phasing issues because everything is sitting in those mids, right? So it doesn't have any space to breathe on this thing. So generally speaking, one, span free, get it, use it. Two, you don't want to see this. You don't want to see this going on. Generally speaking, you want at least the low end stuff to be mono. Now there's always exceptions to the rule. Art, it's subjective, right? But generally speaking, you're going to have an easier time getting this thing correct if a lot of that bass, that low end information is in the mono and not bleeding into the side information, right? We already got a lot of that going on right up in here, in the low mids, right? Which is, now you can see that's where all the sound's coming from, right in there. Going back to that sound selection stuff, you're not seeing much up here, right? And even it's barely getting past like 2K on that thing. So if you're seeing this, it's going to be a rougher time trying to get that to sound good. Okay, now let's move on past that. How do you fix this? How did I fix this? So one, he had a stereo sub bass, and I ended up just taking that out completely, right? My guess is he figured the respace has more on the high end, right? Has more of that information so you can hear it. And he wanted just more low end to it. But you know, when he layered this, it just became too much. We had a bunch of phasing issues, all that, and that's why it ducks in and out to like there's nothing and then there's a lot, but the whole time it was reading as very loud, right, with a bunch of low end information. Okay, I messed around with it, but I ended up just taking out, and what I did is I moved up to this respace, did a decent amount to this thing, ended up pitching it up an octave. He just a little bit of sound selection back to it, right? He wanted the low end, but he just had it too low. So as soon as I added any sort of saturation or anything on it, it was just getting crazy. It was getting really muddy. So I messed around with this for a while, but ended up with these settings. This is not like a, you know, put these on there and you're good, right? But EQ that thing, compression, saturation, right? And then it was messed around. I added back some low end with this since I pitched this actual audio up an octave, and then added low end back through the MV2 in order to get the same effect he was looking for, right? He wants a bunch of low end, but he wants that sort of swirling respace that mixes into the mids. So that's what I tried to achieve via this stuff, right? Again, it's not necessarily about use these things in this order or whatever, but it is about, I set out to, you know, achieve something artistically, the vision that I imagining he had for the space, and did whatever I could to make that happen. And places to start are going to be EQ, compression, saturation, right? That's definitely involved almost every time when you get your sounds from somebody to mix. So that was how I solved that issue. So let's play it real quick, very quickly, and then I'll show you span. Okay. So now you see, so we're still getting some in here, but that's from a lot of the other stuff. You're seeing we get a little bit of that from that top end of the Reese, but not really. It's all mono now, right? Which is huge for this guy. Right now we do have all our information right here, so some of that phasing stuff is not going to be entirely fixed, but it's definitely a lot better. You can also see some more high end going on in this thing, which is what we're going to talk about next. The biggest issues in that original listen through were the muddiness of it. So what I did is essentially just go through and gave everything its own space, right? So that's one of the mistakes we're talking about. Going through, if you have a bunch of things that live in the same sort of area, give them their own space in that area. So I did that via some EQ, right, to bring out the certain tones out of both the lead and the melodies that I really liked and think represented that sound the best. So I kind of stuck those out and tucked other things beneath. Let's see how that looks. 6, there you go. Get the F6, there you go. Main melody, there you go. Giving everything its own space. A lot of this was trying to bring out the higher end of it, right? Because we saw that was an issue. Now what you'll see on all of these, you'll see a bunch of EQ stuff as we talk about stuff like that. Basically back to the sound selection thing, the sounds had a lot of white noise. As I compressed and added effects to them, it constantly brought up that white noise. Drink water, stay hydrated. You know, get you more dihydrogen monoxide in your life. Anyways, but you'll see that, and basically it sounded like garbage as I put saturation and all that stuff. I just kept bringing up the white noise, so I did a bunch of stuff to take that out, just every level I possibly could, basically. Since when I'm doing that, I wasn't really taking out the actual high end I've been trying to boost, right? So if you see that, that's why. Mistake 1, right? Not going mono with the bass stuff, not having enough of it in mono at least, because you can just mono some of the bass if that's the creative choice you want, but not doing that. So having a bunch of phasing issues in the low end. It happens all the time, right? Could be different ways that happens. That's something, right? So that's how I fixed it on this one. And then not giving things their spot within the frequency range. If you want stuff to stand out and sound clear, it's gotta have its own area. And another way to achieve that is the panning stuff, right? So panning and also effects, right, are going to help sit things, whether it's, front to back, or side to side, or, is it moving, right? All that sort of stuff you're going to do with effects and panning stuff, right? But you gotta give everything its own spot. It's panned, yes, but it wasn't hard panned, and the frequencies were so dense and the same, nothing had its own spot frequency wise, that the panning didn't make enough of a difference for the elements to stand out. The only spot they did here is at the very end, when it's mostly just the melodies and the leads playing. So giving it its own spot, super important. We'll just take a quick look. The effects, I got some Serato stuff on here, and then I'm just feeding that into the lead, so some parallel effects on that thing, and then I'm just turning that up into it. Same thing, let's go to the melody effects. On this one, I got a bunch of parallel effects, and this is getting actually sent to this as a bus. So paralleled all these effects, right? Similar to blending in the return track, but paralleled all these in, and then on top of that, add some saturation, and then like I said, it's that EQ stuff for that high buzz, hissing, white noise going on. But all that, right, is going to help give it spot. So we got Haas to add some more width, chorus, beef it up, width again, little Valhalla super massive, because I like it. Gives some cool textures, right? And then again, more width, right? And whoa, what's that? Wider, more width. This thing was super down the middle, right? And just adding that little bit wider also helped make the bass and the drums stand out more. Which, by the way, the drums were really good. I did do stuff to it, mostly EQ. The biggest change I made was the clap. It had way too much low end information. It was just adding into that mid stuff. So I duplicated it, pitched one up, blended that in. I digress. It's the same stuff though, right? If stuff's muddy and it's sitting in the same area, give it its own space. It could look different, right? Maybe you really love the sound. Let's say I love the sound of that clap slash snare. I really love the sound of that clap slash snare, but it had, you know, it was sitting in similar frequencies. I could turn it up, which I think that's what he did. The drums just sounded pretty loud the whole time. I could turn it up, I could pan it maybe, or add some effects, have it stand out a little bit more. But numero uno stuff is just EQ, compression, saturation. EQ, compression, saturation. 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 I've had that beat into my head because it should be. You tastefully do it at a bunch of levels, and then across the thing as a whole, so all the individual parts across the thing as a whole. That's a really big part of having something sound really full, really clear, right, filled out like you want it to, like the stuff you listen to in your free time. So those things, okay? And then what's the last one? And then the last mistake was not having automation. Right, I just said something about the drums being super loud. They were loud the whole time. They were the same level the whole time, right? You just kind of sat there and the mix, the levels kind of stayed the same. So adding automation, right? You hear it all the time because you should be doing it, right? You really want the track to be great, a great mix on that thing. You want to add a little bit of movement to it. Could be volume, could be panning, could be both, could be your effects. But you want to do that, and that will push your music or the music you're mixing closer to that vision for the song, right? What is this thing? What does it sound like up here? That stuff's going to really push it to what you're hearing up top. So I'll just give a quick example of how I did this on the kick. So bam, there you go. This doesn't affect anything, but this is the volume I want in this section. Then in this section I want it, is that 2 dB, a little over 2 dB back, and then I turned it down as it went out here. The other one I used it just for now, just to give you the idea. I messed around with this lead. I did this. It's not a lot, but I wanted just certain aspects to kind of pop out a little bit more in the mix, come up, leave, mix around, right? And that stuff's achieved via automation. Something like, and then this on the outro was just, it's fading out, and it stood out a lot more because of the EQ and stuff. So it was like crazy loud at the end, so I just turned that thing down as the rest faded out too. So from the top, sound selection, right? Sound selection's important. So on the production side of things, if you're sending your mixes off to someone and then getting them back, and then they're good at mixing, but it's missing something, it's probably sound selection, or it's still muddy, or it still isn't quite what you wanted. There's probably some sound selection issues. Likely. At least take a look. See where everything's sitting. 2, low end stuff, having a bunch of phasing issues, having a bunch of side information bleed into that really, really low end stuff. And then we talked about giving everything its own space via EQing it, via compressing it, saturation, right? And then finding out from there where it sits in the mix. And then I would say I'll put effects and automation together. Add effects that give it more space, put it in a certain space, and then automation, keep things flowing, keep it moving, make that mix feel alive, get it to where it sounds in your head. So if you are doing those things, all this stuff isn't crazy, this probably isn't new to you. Maybe you've seen in the little trick that I did. Cool, I hope you did. But definitely, if you're newer to mixing, and if you're not doing some of these things, start doing these things, right? And it's a lot of plug and play, mess around, find what works. All right, I don't think we'll listen to my final mix.
Do you have a lost love? Yes. We won't with. He's not gone forever.
One more time, we'll go back through to his, get some quick comparison.
Do you have a lost love? Yes. We won't with. He's not gone forever. Fuck, yeah.
Alright, there's a video. Thanks for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, YouTube stuff. Peace, love. Up the lines, dude. One roar.